Yes, you got. Now I can hear you. Hello, you're frozen. Okay.
Hello.
Now I can see you. How are you?
I'm doing good, Maria. How are you doing? How is US? How are things in the US?
It's also California is back. We're just hoping that the rest of the states do not go back into that because it's going to cause a lot of jobs and stuff like that.
Indeed.
Yeah, so I want to welcome you to the show. I'm very busy doing a lot of things, so I don't want it to be too long, the interview. And so I just want you to maybe start by introducing yourself, tell us what you do, and we take it from there. Yugratna, you seem to be off. Okay, I'm going to ask her to join again. I think she's having bad connection on her end. Okay, let me try to get in touch with her again. I can see, yes, the internet on her side isn't that great. So let me just get in touch with her again and see if she can join.
Okay, so I changed my internet, so I think you can hear me better now. I just reconnected my router again. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we were going to first set of questions, which is just for you to introduce who you are and what you do.
Yeah, first of all, Maria, thanks very much for having me and conducting these shows. And I saw the last one, which was about how to work with your partner. It was quite insightful, especially for women who are in jobs and they also have partners, especially women from developing countries. They are different cultural contexts. So I really thank you for starting this initiative of having these discussions, and I'm very honored to join you and the team of BLI today and the incredible work that you have been doing. So thanks again again for having me. So, just to a little bit about myself, because you said introduce yourself. So I think I am Yugratna. I am 24 years old, and I am an Indian citizen, and I have been active in the climate change and environmental advocacy since a young age, since the age of 10, and specifically within the UN spaces since I was 12 years old, and that too because there were some UN agencies that were very progressive at that time on how they engaged young people and especially children. And since then, I have been active in this space and engaged in a lot of different capacities. So that has included being a junior board member in the Children Board of UN Environment Program from 2008 until 2011, followed by which I was an organizer for 350 in India, worked on a lot of campaigns on anti-coal, on climate strike. That was in 2015 in the lead up to Paris, and then of course I engaged with the UNFCCC process, where in 2018 I served as the elected Global South focal point for the youth constituency to UNFCCC. And at the moment, I work for Plan for the Planet, which is an international NGO that's working in different countries on climate change education and empowerment of young children, so children that are high school students, but also adolescents that go up to college students. And I have also been engaged in youth constituency to UNEP, where I currently serve as one of the two elected focal points until 2021 in the preparations for the next UN Environment Assembly. That being said, I am an engineer by my education in electrical, electronics, and communications engineer, satellites, semiconductors, and those things. But of course, life deviated in terms of priorities, and at this time, the environmental action is a higher priority. But that's all, Maria. Yes.
It appears that you're involved in so many things. I mean, when I was 12 years, I think all I was thinking about was finishing my primary school. So, hearing from someone like you who has been in this space for, is it almost a decade now that you've been active, is very inspiring. And I know there must be some challenges that you faced, but I wanted to first ask you what drove you to get engaged in the environmental space at a very young age and to continue to do it as you grow.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And I think there are really two, three, inflection points in my very young age that I can point to. And the first sort of that inflection point was some of the critical observations that I saw in the society around me. If I want to point out, I remember that in my when I was very young, like 7-year-old, 8-year-old, I used to visit my grandmother very often, and there used to be a pond in front of her house. So really, just across the street, there was a big pond, and it used to have fishes, and there were a lot of people who used to come and spend time there. And eventually, I saw that city turn into a ghost town, because it was a city which is one of the India's highest coal mining cities. So when I was growing up, I would see all of these coal power plants. I would see machines and trucks leaving out the waste that is produced after you harvest or sort of the coal. And eventually, in the next 2-3 years, that pond it just stopped existing. It became a piece of land. There were people who started farming on it, and that was one point where I felt, okay, this is something that's probably not something I wanted to see. And then I think the major driving also came from when I was in my school in 5th and 6th grade. We had school clubs on environment. So there was this NGO called Tarumitra, and which is an Indian NGO and does engage school students a lot. And we had a club that we started in our school, and that's also where sort of this journey in a more formal way, if I may say, or more structured way start. And we did a lot of campaigning in the school, research on what kind of trees are there, and awareness campaigns. And I think that really helped me understand this a little bit more. And I would see, trees cut down, like big trees chopped up in a city that I was moving to. And I just used to feel helpless that I can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about this. So how can I do something about it? And I think that is what kind of got me into this. And at that was an age I wasn't aware of, the politics that we have now in international space. That really came from the feeling that we have to conserve the nature, we have to preserve our environment, and how should we do it. So that was really how the journey, sort of started.
And did you think, like, at that point when you were learning about the environment and having this passion to want to change the world, did you think at that point that you would have an impact, or did you know the kind of impact you would have, or were you just doing it based on how you felt?
At that point of time, to be honest, our impacts were rather small. So impacts meant, okay, we have to do a study of a tree nursery, so, and we have to teach another class that is junior to you, or a school club, about a topic, or we have to do a debate or a quiz competition. So at that time, I would say the targets were small or measurable, I would say. And but yes, there were times, there were moments when, especially, we used to have these discussion within our school clubs and within the networks that we were in, that how can we actually change the bigger picture, how can we influence. And to be like where I was living in that point of time was also it's a city called Shamli in India, and it's located to one of the cities next to a city which has, by the way, highest crime rates in Asia. And it also has some sugar industry, it has some industries which are material based, and we used to see a lot of pollution because of the hay, and in the air, if you see those black soot that falls. So I think there was this broader overall connection, that okay, what can we do about it. And yes, there was a feeling of helplessness, but there was also this joy in doing little things, I think. And that's what eventually then makes a bigger yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that also brings me to the next point, which is really about empowering global, which you've really done a lot. Like, for the short time, so that you're like getting people from developing countries into the UN space. And I'm just wondering, so what do you think drove you to do that, and why are you so passionate about having young people come to the table from developing countries or countries where they're less privileged?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Marie. And I think I can answer this from a really personal point of view. So the first international conference I attended, the first time I actually stepped on an airplane in my life, I had never actually traveled in an airplane before that, was when UN Environment Program was doing a children's conference in Norway in 2008. And they funded a lot of children and student clubs especially. And our student club in India, the one that I was in, was somehow lucky to be selected. So 3 or 4 people from our club going to that conference, essentially. And that was something that yes, but I would, if I have to be honest, I would say it wasn't really the turning point, where you realize that, okay, the kind of dynamics we are in. Yes, it felt good to have that opportunity, to have that space, to have that privilege, if I may say, to influence, these different processes. And I think my sort of the inflection point again was UNEA 1, that was in 2014. which was also another international, event where I took part in. And I see huge discrepancy in participation of young people from developing countries there. Of course, it's not as bad because UNEA is taking place in Nairobi. So of course, there is young people from Kenya and neighboring countries that are joining. But I'm talking about the broader, landscape. And the second point was when I was in Paris, and which was again not financially easy for me to participate. I had funding from 350 from one of the projects that we did, a partial funding, and then I had some of my savings and my parents' savings that helped me take part in those, and supported by, of course, Plan for the Planet. And I see that most of the climate change spaces are not inclusive. You see similar developed country delegates that are, for lack of better term, dominating those conversations, and at times also appropriating. You see a young person from the US, for instance, talking about indigenous peoples, who has particularly, and not belonging to an indigenous nation, but talking about indigenous peoples. There are people talking about these other youth, and there is this need, or there is this drive that I felt that this is a space where we have to bring young people who are not privileged, because this is about them. Like climate crisis is, yes, it is about all of us, but it is about young people who are in the countries of small island states, who are on the front lines, who, for them, it's not about circular economy. They don't probably even understand what these concepts mean. For them, it's not about CDM. It's about how they wake up and then they make it to the next day, how they ensure that their house is not going to be submerged in the next year. And unless we are bringing those voices on the table, I mean, what the hell are we even doing? Are we being inclusive? And I think that moment was something, that passion was something that really drive me to create these spaces, and also create continuous spaces. Because yes, engagement is one part. You can bring someone to an international avenue, but if you don't build their capacity, if you don't be with them, it is not going to be sustainable. So I think that was really the driving point, that I, as a young person from the South, suffered to an extent to get these opportunities. And I just want to make sure that more people have this, because that is it is who we are doing this for. So yeah.
So what challenges, I know that, for example, we have financial challenges as one, but what other challenges did you face in trying to empower young people from the global South? If you can speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, of course, Maria, resources are one challenge. It's not easy to just really have resources that you can get right people from the right background. And I mean, if you look at how UN agencies are, most of the UN agencies or UN offices are in the countries of global north. There are only few offices, if I may say, UNEP in Nairobi, the Addis office, and some of the regional offices, obviously, that are in the developing countries. But major institutions and headquarters are in the developed countries. So it is first of all, of course, about the resource component, like getting someone to participate in a international conference from small island states costs you almost 5 times that it would take you to get someone to participate from Europe or someone to participate from Africa. I think that is one challenge. The other challenges, which I feel, is that there aren't enough knowledge resources that are available for young people from developing countries. Most of the knowledge, or even scientific data to an extent, if I may say, but mostly the knowledge of the capacity component is very centric of institutions that we see in the developed countries. It is by them. But when I say this, I'm absolutely not undermining them. I think they do great work. But I'm saying there is a lack of research and literature or appropriate capacity building resources that you can have for young people from developing countries to understand and also contextualize, these things. And I think this is not only a challenge in youth space, this is a challenge in global governance. You can bring a delegation of 400 people to an international process, whereas Haiti might not be able to bring even 4 people. So we see these challenges everywhere, and that's where it becomes a systemic issue. And if I may say, the third, challenge obviously is that people don't take this as a sometimes as a more of a tokenistic exercise as opposed to a meaningful exercise. For them, it's about, oh yes, youth, or oh yes, a global south youth, as opposed to a generation, or seeing young people sort of as the emerging leaders of tomorrow, and the need to empower them. I think those are really some of the challenges. And of course, I mean, this is quite common knowledge, but if you look at how civil society landscape within the UN system is evolving, there is a growing trend where civil society actors are sometimes treated as third rail groups. And it's probably not the most apt term to use, but the message is that we need more spaces for democratic participation of civil society groups in the UN. And if that is compromised, by default children and youth are also compromised, because they are also part of this sort of civil society net. So I think that's also, looking at the bigger picture is also important in this case. Yes.
So, like, I agree with everything you're saying, and I'm just wondering, because I know you've been doing these Global South scholarships and things like that, and honestly, I think you're one of the very few who I know that is doing something like this, or maybe the only one I know. The rest of the other people who do it like organizationally, and even then, not the number of young people that are involved. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's any way to improve access for young people from the global south to participate meaningfully, um, over a long period of time, as opposed to just having a few scholarships which are, spread, and not everyone can participate? Because I can't say that that some of the applications were like over 200, and you can only do a tenth of those. So how can we change this narrative? Because it's really a big issue.
Yeah, Maria, if I may tell you from my experience, the scholarships, especially the ones that we did, for example, ACE Youth Forum, and that was something that helped young people have a paragraph about children and youth in the Paris Rulebook eventually. We received over 3,500 applications, and we can take only like 35, 40, because that's what we have. And of course, it's not easy to say no, because yes, some of them are very high merit young people. So how do you actually choose, that, okay, this young person is more important as compared to that young person? And that's always a difficult decision. And I agree with you that the participation of young people, or especially from developing countries, cannot be left on an ad hoc basis, that okay, this it has to be, there has to be more permanence, and there has to be continuity of participation. And I think the solution to that is what some things that we already are seeing. I think the solution to that is that developing countries need to prioritize bringing young people, especially those that come from the youth-led organizations, directly in the delegations. And some of the countries, I can quote some examples, like Liberia recently made a youth leader from their country as the ACE focal point for Liberia. I think that's a very good example. We have also seen in UNEA's countries, especially that are from some of the Asian countries, that Singapore, they also brought some of their youth delegates, if I remember correctly, and through the government institutional support. And I think that is something that governments needs to institutionalize. And I mean, that being said, I am aware that it's not that easy for developing country delegations to just fund extra people, because they're already very compromised, and which is where there is need to recognize the agency and the power that these young people bring, and that there is a value in actually building the capacity even for the national government, because these are the people that then will take over. I mean, they are you need them or you need successors in the coming years, and you need to sort of treat the current pool of young people in a nice way. And that's obviously not easy. I'm also aware that in some countries, there are sometimes practices like, okay, they do not really bring youth representatives, but there is a factor that government chooses, okay, that you are a youth representative versus you're not. So we have to be a little more progressive there. That is one part. And I think the other part, to make this more continuous, is that custodian agencies also need to mainstream it. So when FAO does their Commission on World Food Security negotiations, or WHO does their World Health Assembly, they need to allocate dedicated budget, dedicated resources to ensure that youth are able to participate in those, and that they are able to engage, and they come from youth-led organizations. So they're chosen by youth-led organizations. It's a peer selection process. I mean, that being said, we have to also look at from a point of view of not just events, but also an year-round participation. So that means that is where some of these programmatic agencies, if I may say, not really the conventions, but the programmatic agencies that have mandate to support youth, have to do more youth programs in their program of work, whether that is UNEP, whether that is UNDP, whether that is UNESCO, the sort of, the heavy movers, which have more of influence, if I may say, if not influence, but really mandate, or the nature of their agency. And they have to step up and prioritize this. I know UNDP does, for example, a lot of programs where they support via UN country teams. And I think that needs to be strengthened a little bit more further in context of especially the UN youth strategy. So these are some of the things that we can do. And I think, without taking much time, I would also add that it's not only the responsibility of developing countries, it's also the responsibility of developed countries. EU, for example, has to support young people from Africa, for instance. I know there are political dimensions to it, that are you funding now, youth delegates, or whose views are they representing, and so on. There's always that component. But I think there has to be clear, there are clear defined mechanisms, there are financial mechanisms through which some of these projects can really be facilitated in a long-term manner. And I agree with you that the only way of doing this is institutionalizing this, and doing this together with young people, and that's the important part of it.
Okay, so question already. So the question is, do you think that because you've been in the UN space for a very long time, that you become a, how do they say, a controversial figure? Like some people like out for all the good stuff you're doing, resent you because they feel or they think that you're taking up too much space with and
Sorry, Maria, you were cutting in and out a little bit. Could you just repeat yourself, the last
yes,
sentence?
I'm saying,
I think I just
right now,
my
well, no, but do you think that you may be what they call a controversial figure in the youth space? Because some people, it appears that there's a group that really likes what you're doing, and then there's a group that feels maybe you've taken up too much space in the youth network because you've been in this space for a very long time. So that's my question. What do you think about that? Do you think that at this point you might be a controversial figure? Oh, Yugratna, you're frozen. Okay, I'm going to add you back. I think it's a problem with your network, so just give me a minute.
Okay, you're muted.
Yeah, you had frozen there for a second, so I don't know, maybe it's the net. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I hear you better. You're no breaking.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I hear you're breaking up a little bit. Let me try this again. Okay, you had
Okay. I think you mentioned something around being public figure in these spaces and how that is manageable versus. I think, Maria, I think my answer to that really is, when we are operating in this space, especially when you have a lot of engagement with external actors involved, including organizations that work on international level, including, even groups like BLI, and I'm sure you have experience working with different stakeholders. I think there is always, like, yes, you are engaged in a public setting, and there is not much you can do about how at times people perceive what you are doing, and there isn't much that you can do about how people are reacting. Of course, what one can do is to make sure that we are adhering to our moral values, we are adhering to our very high ethical standards, and at the same time acknowledging mistakes that we are making. And I think that's a very important part of growing up, because as young people we come from an education system, at least from developing countries, where you are really not taught some of the life skills as a part of your education system. You're taught a lot of physics, chemistry, mathematics, and subjects, but no one actually tells you how to take decisions. No one actually teaches you how to, that part of emotional intelligence. And I think this is something that we as young people need to prioritize as we grow up, and we need to have clear moral and ethical standards that we always commit to when we do our work. And I mean, that being said, we have to acknowledge that we are growing up. I acknowledge that I'm growing up, and in process of that, things are not always perfect. We sometimes intentionally, unintentionally, I mean, not intentionally, sometimes, despite having best intentions, we come across in a way that can not be ideal for an external party. And I think we just have to be cognizant and make sure that we empathize with the other partner as well. And I think this is really what the climate action is about, right? Climate action, or preserving the nature, is about how we relate and empathize with those that we do not see, that we haven't met, sufferings of those that we do not know. And that level of empathy and connection that we need, whether it is communities in the south, whether it is young people living in conflict areas, in war zones, how do we relate to their experiences, and how do we make sure that their experiences inform us? So I think this level of empathy, self-awareness, but at the same time not a doomsday scenario either, we need to keep the optimism alive, is very important in maintaining that balance and that method of moving forward and continuing to do the right thing. And I also think that what we do inspires and also becomes sort of a guiding point for those that are younger than us. I mean, it could simply be someone in your family, your younger siblings seeing you grow up. It could be younger people in your community, in your university, in your school, in your workplace, where they imbibe certain habits and certain characteristics. And I think it's very important to also set that right example, and to point out when you're not setting that right example, and make it clear to them that this is not, these are the lessons learned that we have, that perhaps the upcoming budding generation should be cautious about. And I think that is a cycle of learning that we have to enrich more.
And so that brings me to the next, like,
Yeah.
I'm just questions. And so the first one really is about the mental health issue, because I know a lot of young people working in these UN spaces or youth spaces deal with how to take care of their mental health, how to have a stable, I don't even know how to explain the word, but you find that a lot of people are struggling in their day-to-day personal life because they're trying to do something good, but at the same time, there are all these roadblocks, and then they don't agree with each other, and that leads to disagreements, which really affects their mental health. So I'm just wondering, what's your take on that, and how can we break that cycle and maybe make the UN and the youth spaces within the UN a safe space for young people to be involved in? And then I'll ask you another follow-up question after that.
Yeah, and thanks, Maria, for that question. And I think this is quite relevant, especially with the global pandemic health crisis that we are facing, and how COVID-19 is making everyone nervous about their families, about their loved ones, about themselves, and how especially young people and adolescents are being affected by this in their work, in their studies, and also, of course, these advocacy work that young people do. I think, especially when it comes to youth, uh, one factor is that many of the youth that engage in these processes, they do not do it as a full-time work, at least when they get started in their formative years. They often do it together with their universities, or in the internships that they have, or early years of schooling and learning, and early job graduates, for example. And managing that together with sort of this extracurricular, if I may say, or advocacy, can be a challenge at times. And that, of course, is becomes a problem of, if you don't prioritize things that you're doing, a problem of mental health, and also eventually how you are affects people around you. So you're not just affecting yourself, but you're affecting your loved ones, those in your community, and it is never, the impact gets is spread, and that's something we have to be cautious about. And if you ask me what we can do, I think there are many things, examples that I can cite. I think the first, and which is a fundamental, is that there needs to be high level of self-care that one needs to practice in this space. So you need to know when you have to plug off from your work, when you have to really spend time in your hobbies, in your whatever that personal zone that you have. And this is something, when I was managing my university work with all the climate advocacy, it was difficult. I mean, it is still is difficult, but it's little more flexibility because you don't have exams and you don't have all the sort of those commitments. And I think that kind of having that personal space or growth space is quite important. And I think there are many resources available on internet. There are many self-help books, some I can recommend, including the 7 Habits of Efficient People, that also some of my mentors recommended to me. Those form a very good resources for young people to learn and also think about how they can better structure their life. I think that is one component. The other component is that the UN system also has a role in this to play. Is our young people that are coming to international spaces, whether that's conferences or whether that is simply learning to engage in those spaces, especially minors, especially those under 18, those under 21, those really young, are they being given enough trainings about these? Are there training toolkits? Are there capacity building that is provided on how to navigate this space? And I think that's something that UN agencies, of course, together with sort of these, I would, if I may say, experienced youth like yourself, have to develop and then share. And I think there are also some good models that exist. In the last COP, for instance, in Madrid, we have seen there was this mindfulness space that some of the groups had created as a pavilion that was open to all the participants, where like a lot of delegates had this really time to connect with themselves. I think that is quite important. And I think the final part, I would say, of course, there's a personal growth component, there is institutional component. I think then there is a component of young people that are engaging in this space to be able to think beyond themselves, that what we are doing, what you are doing, what I am doing, what people in our network are doing, this is not about us. This will never be about us. This is about those voiceless children and youth who do not have access to these spaces, and who are even unawareingly trusting us to represent them, because that really is the mandate, or not mandate, but moral responsibility, if I may say. Mandate is a political term, so if I may say, moral responsibility of us as youth advocates to do. So are we able to think beyond ourselves? Are we able to think that, okay, how does what I'm doing, of course, how does it make me happy, but at the same time, how does it advances the broader cause of meaningful youth engagement? And we have to detach ourselves at times and see ourselves as facilitators of this space, and not as competitors, because there's a very important principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. That means you and I have different skills, we have different contributions that we bring, I cannot do everything, you cannot do everything, but all of us perhaps together can, do something. And I think that spirit needs to be more broadened, and everything doesn't have to become, if I may say, like a power struggle among people, because then what's really the difference between us and the negotiators who cannot, get stuff done even for years, and they are still negotiating. And the Paris Agreement is not yet implemented, right? Yes, it is. You have a Paris Agreement, you don't have a rule book yet. So I think those are some critical things that we see in the global governance, and we do not have to sort of necessarily, you know replicate them. And I think I would also like to point out in this on how much influence non-youth actors have. There are some youth that okay, there are definitions of youth. Each region classifies youth in the way they do. African Union classifies until 35, 40. But I think we have to keep a distinction between youth led and those probably that have to, that are not youth led groups interfering or trying to sometimes get into the youth spaces. And by this, I also imply some of the fossil fuel industries, or some of the industries or groups with sort of vested interests that want to instrumentalize youth sometimes. So we have to be very careful, about them. And I think all of this as a whole becomes part of making your mental health or sanity more bearable in these spaces.
Okay, that's really good. And I think I I like more on the institutional aspect of it, because yes, I'm personally working on my personal side of things, and some of the things I do is like, yes, go off my phone when you need to, and sometimes do yoga. Walking helps a lot. I also want to go back to the other issue, which I think kind of also ties this mental issue, which is, do you think that because yes, you say some people volunteer, they volunteer in this space, not full time, but there are those who volunteer and it's like their life's work. It's something they do 24/7, and they do this for years and years and years. And I'm not insinuating you, I'm just saying some of the people I know who are doing this, and they're in this space for years and years. And do you think that maybe that also contributes to the mental health issues that we face working in this space? Like the fact that we spend our days just focused on doing all this work, we're not getting paid for it unless there's a program or funding that comes up, and then maybe it's structured in that way. But most of the time you're just doing it out of the goodness of your heart because you care for this issue. And then in the long run, it kind of like wears your health down.
Yeah, I think, Maria, that's a very, very good question, and I think that's relevant not just to both of us, but to a broader set of youth audience. And I think your question touches upon three major things, if I may say. So the first thing is, again, the essence of this, and the essence of this is that there are less resources available for young people who want to do these things in a full-time sort of basis, right? I read very recently a quote that said activism should not be a hobby, and I can only agree with it, because what young people are doing or what their passion is, it needs to be supported more. And especially from a country I come from, I can speak from my experience. Most, if I may say, a general opinion in the society is that, oh, if you're a doctor, if you're an engineer, if you're an accountant, you have a successful career. But if you say that, oh, I'm working for an NGO, I'm working for environmental sector, society has a different perception about it. And of course, societal perceptions don't change overnight. You cannot, like they say, you cannot legislate your way into gender equality. This is something that is built over years, that is built and enhanced gradually. And that is something that we need to keep enhancing, and we need to keep spreading this message that these things that young people are doing are important, and perhaps even more important at times than some of the other career fields, because this is really about existence of all of us, right? So that is the fundamental root cause of why this happens. Then the second aspect, obviously, is longevity. how long do you stay in a space, how long do you stay in a role. And I think there are many parallels you can draw on this. So if you look at negotiators, there are set of negotiators, including in my from my own country, that have been negotiating since 1992. I can also tell you, I know colleagues that have been in the process since 1972, when UNEP was first established. So, being in their process for almost 50 years and seeing all of these different things take place. And some of them have stayed on, and in different capacities. You see some people becoming, taking different roles, which of course happens everywhere. But at the same time, I think the characteristic of the youth space is that it is dynamic in nature. Youth space is not like, not like a public servant space where you are a secretary or a administrative officer, and you can be the administrative officer for 10 years in a row or 20 years in a row, posted in different spaces. Of course, that has its own big value and very significant value. In youth space, there is part of dynamic nature in it, which means that when we are in this process, we have to understand our role. You come in a space, and we can think of this really in a school sort of a format, if I may say, a learning format. You come in a space where you are new, where you learn new things, where you have sort of a growth curve, and then you understand and you engage in these different processes. You mobilize communities. At certain point of time, you reach sort of a peak, right, of how much you have done, how much you've contributed. And then the role has to evolve. It has to become sort of a mentorship role, that how are you then going to mentor the budding generation and making sure more people have opportunities. I think that is sometimes the understanding that people lack. And it is not because people are inherently bad. I think it's because people are committed to this, and perhaps they don't pay attention to these things, or no one is doing it with any wrong intentions. I'm saying that it is just sometimes we just have to be self-aware a little bit more, and then drive that. And I think the point that you mentioned, that some people work a lot, and then I go back to my main argument, where I said the fundamental argument is there is no what is your perk of doing something like this. And when you do not have a perk, which is a monetary perk, because of course the resources are less, it is already on top of your full-time job or your school or your life. People often go into tendencies of having power as a perk, or feeling powerful or feeling important as a perk. And this is not wrong. This is how human nature is. This is how our civilizations were built. Going out and hunting animals and bringing animals home, sharing their skins, and all of that, and evolving into this. So this is something that has already been sort of architected in human beings. And we need to see how we can evolve our understanding, that we are able to manage these things, and we're able to again see this from a perspective of, it's like, yes, to some degree, how it benefits us, how it helps us in our growth, but at the same time how it's helping the space, the collective space, in its growth. And if you're able to maintain a balance, you're able to then navigate through some of these challenges that we face. And of course, multilateralism is like, you can't stop challenges. Multilateralism is about a challenge, is about personalities. And as much as relations are institutional, they're also relations that are equally personal in nature. So I think the balance is quite important, if I may say. Yeah.
That's a very nice way that you put it. I totally agree with you that if when the resources are limited, and there's nothing to bring in the monetary aspect, we obviously go back to wanting control and maintaining power. And I realized that when I was doing a panel at the previous COP, and one of the young people asked the question that why is it, but this was really focused with the African continent, and the question was, why is it that the young people who are already in the climate change space, because that's where I really do most of the work, why is it that the young people in the climate change space, once they get there, they do not want to give room or opportunity for other people to come on board, and they're fighting for the next opportunity? themselves as opposed to sharing it with new people? Honestly, couldn't answer because I mean, you said that the resources are limited already. So once you're in that space, you almost feel like if you don't um, apply or put your best foot forward, it's like you're leaving. It's kind of like fear of missing out. Then again, that doesn't benefit the community that you're trying to serve. So maybe that's a lesson that we also need to learn. So yeah, I want to ask you a light question here, and then I'll ask you one last tough question. But the light question is, what have been the best experiences you've had working with young people?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And I might have to little bit think on that, but I can surely highlight, some of the experiences that I count as sort of highlight, if I may say, of my experiences. And I think the first experience I would highlight, and I'll go in a bit of a chronological order, is that when we started again, I go talk about my school clubs. I did not used to talk about my school clubs a lot until sometime last year, when I reflected and thought about how all of this has started. And I think when I think about that school club that we started, I think of that as a very positive example, or a space that we had created, because even when I graduated from that school, there were other like students who carried that forward. So I think starting that at one point of time was a very good experience for me. And I can also point out to sometime in 2014, specifically if you're talking about sort of the UN advocacy. We had advocated a lot for UNEP to have major group models, where they have constituencies recognized and 9 major groups recognized, because UNEP never had that until, yes, the major group existed, but in an informal way. And I think in 2014 we were able to push through for the major groups within UNEP to become a permanent engagement for civil society, and in line with Agenda 21, which I think, if you look at UNEP being established in 1972, this becoming operational in 2014, I think it was a huge, success in terms of youth-led, advocacy there. I can also point out to some of the experiences I have had in climate change space, where I have seen young people, especially who are from developing countries, who do not have a bank account, whose parents do not have a bank account, and they coming to international spaces and sharing their perspective. I don't want to name any specific people, but there have been young people from Asia, there have been young people from the island countries that have gotten their representation. And I remember there was one youth who was once got very emotional during one of the negotiations, saying that he was the only delegate from his country in that process, because even the government delegate was not able to make in time and arrived later on. So I mean, imagine that, a multilateral space that brings together like thousands of people, but you do not bring together a country. I mean, you cannot leave anyone behind. And I think that was a really emotional moment for me to learn that, okay, we did something right, that okay, there are young people that are coming up, and that they are building capacities, and they're able to be engaged in these spaces, really. And I think another example I can cite to you as, if I may say, some of my good memories is when in 2018, I talked about this before, we did the rule book negotiations were going on for the Paris Agreement. There was not even a paragraph or even a mention of youth or children anywhere. And then we had conducted ACE Youth Forum, which was really planned and done in less than 1.5 months of time, and with all of people, at least me, working voluntarily for that entire process. And then that eventually led to a full annex of children and youth written recommendations that were made part of the rule book on action for climate empowerment, that included youth education, capacity building, systemic participation, political participation. And if you go and look back at Katowice climate package, what governs Paris Agreement is that particular text. And I think that has eventually, moved this sort of momentum on climate change education a lot in the last years since 2018 COP has concluded. So these are some of the small things, and also, maybe big things. And I also feel a bit privileged when I am able to actually quote some of the negotiation successes, because I don't think many young people can quote that. I think that is, a part. And if I may quote a very final one, so where I work in Plan for the Planet, we have a model where we do academies in small in different countries, especially countries in the global south. And I have seen very recently, in the last year, there was a chapter that came up in Tajikistan. And I know there are some young people setting up a chapter in Syria. So imagine talking climate change education to children and schools in countries that are uh, which do not prioritize children and youth issues. And of course they cannot, if they have problems which are perhaps take higher priorities on eyes of decision makers. And I fully respect, each country's right to govern how they see fit. But at the same time, you have to empower the younger generation. And I think if we're able to do these, through our efforts and with everyone, I think these things, give you satisfaction at end of the day. Yeah.
Okay, so the question I had is, I think that the UN, how do I rephrase it? What do you think that the UN right now is relevant to what's going on? Like, what's their relevance right now? Because, for example, in the States, I can tell you where I live, not very many people actually know about what are SDGs and what's the UN, and but they do know about climate change because it's spoken about in the news a lot. But unfortunately, they haven't really had an education about what the UN is. So I'm just asking you, do you think it's relevant in today's setting? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think, Maria, that's very, very good question. And I again have a two staggered response to this. And I think my first response is, of all the multilateral spaces that exist, there are many multilateral organizations, right? United Nations is that one, and probably the only avenue where all countries have an equal say, right? I'm not talking about Security Council for that matter, which is, yes, we understand there are different dynamics, but I'm talking about a general picture where developed countries and developing countries are actually able to come together on a platform and exchange ideas, propose recommendations, resolutions, decisions. And without this space for where else do you see developing countries having this kind of a space? The current president of General Assembly is from Nigeria. The upcoming president of the General Assembly is going to be from a Pacific island state, from a SIDS. And I think this is where the space which provides you this kind of a global leadership to countries which otherwise probably, because of lack of resources and because of also priorities that they have, may not be able to access or have an international, say in international spaces. So I think the multilateralism concept, right, is something that is very important, that people have to work with each other, countries have to work with each other. And I think UN is still serving as that space. And of course, it can be much better. There is obviously issues of coherence in so many agencies, so many processes. And recently, WHO has been taking lead on COVID response, for instance. And I mean, it has been met with mixed responses all across the globe. And it's like, I know this is probably bit not the most politically correct thing to say, but if you look at the general media response, right, so there have been positive media responses, there have been negative media responses. In my country, I mean, the media is just another narrative altogether, as if WHO, perpetuated this crisis, and so on. So I think there are different reactions that these issues as any issue, there are different reactions to everything, and I think we cannot really prevent that. But UN has to become more responsive and inclusive of young people. Then the other component of this, which you mentioned about, do people know about UN? If you go down, if I go, I mean, I live in a pretty urban city at the moment, but like 20 kilometers, if I drive down to one direction, I will have villages. And if I go there and ask them, do you know about UN? They don't know about UN. They don't care about SDG 6. They want water. They want food. They want to send their children to, to educate them. If they have a girl child, they're worried about how will they marry off their girl, where will they get dowry from. It's really not about SDG 5 to them. They don't understand these concepts. And so I think there is a bigger question then, is then UN being relevant to grassroots? Is the UN being relevant to common public? And how can we make it relevant? Because we have to understand that this is not a fault per se of a particular individual or a particular country or particular, it is a systemic failure, right? It's a perpetuated systemic failure that certain things, certain methodologies are done in a way that sometimes do not have these perspectives reflected. UN 75 tried to reach out. I think that has been quite, it gained quite some momentum in the external audience, as well on UN 75. And I think the key part in this is, yes, what you said, like in California, people do not know about the UN, they don't know about SDGs. Sometimes you, as UN system, and I mean, you and I are in that space where we cannot really say that UN system is an external partner to us, because we have been in the space long enough to also somehow be part of the problems while being trying to find solutions. So I think we have to stop being echo chambers, that yes, doing reaching to the same people by doing the same thing, because you don't have to preach the mass, right? So you don't have to inform the informed ones. And I think that is sometimes a problem that often becomes in the UN. And there have been also some successful campaign. If you look at World Environment Day, that really mobilized the masses. People know about World Environment Day. People may not know about UNEP. People may not know about chemicals and waste, but they know about there is a Earth Day, there is a World Environment Day. So I think some of these, strategies, a communication aspect has to be very, very well driven. And I think when it comes to how can you make UN relevant to the citizens, I think as much as it's the responsibility of the UN, it's also the responsibility of national government. You The governments have to spread this information among its citizens as well. And I mean, for a government that's dealing with war crisis, for a government that's still struggling to make ends meet or provide food for most of their families in their country, are you expecting them to teach about SDGs? Are you expecting them to I mean, and I think these are perspectives, if you have that go missing in international spaces. People Someone once told me that, okay, when people from my continent come to the UN, they think about, look at the SDGs, they are very great, there are these SDGs, this and that, but when they go down, they still have to operate in the same environment where all of these things do not become a priority. And then yes, it has to be mainstreamed. If you ask what can we as young people do, I think we as young people need to spread this wherever we can. This part about public awareness is extremely important, but I think as much as you and I, or 10 youth organizations can do, governments can do it overnight, because governments rule. It's about policies, it's about legislation. If a new private mobile network is launched in a country like mine, within a week, within a month, you will see hoardings pop up in small villages, small towns, everyone knowing about it. Oh, this happened, this happened. Same when it comes to issues of, for example, movie industry or film industry. There is a widespread information, but when it comes to really critical information, that IPCC is saying that you have 12 years to limit warming to 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, not many people know about it. So I think that part has to be strengthened, and that's how we can make UN relevant. And yeah.
I agree with what you're saying. Really. Also, I actually have a friend who left the UN space because they were saying that it's like you're talking to yourselves. It's the same people all the time. So yeah, what you say about um, us as young people going and spreading it out at the grassroots is really important and key. And I think that's something I'm definitely going to take from this conversation. I also like action. Like action is really a key thing, and I like the logo for, no, the tagline for Plan for the Planet, which is stop talking, start planting. I think it's really key to show people that it's not all about just talking all the time, but what are you really doing, when you go back where you are and stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to wind up with one question on COVID-19, and because I know India has been greatly impacted by the coronavirus. So I just want to know from you how it has affected you and how things are over there, and how you're doing in general.
Yeah, I think it's been really, it's not in a good position where we are in India at the moment. I know health agencies are trying their best, but the curve is not yet sort of flattened yet. It's still steep, not steep, but like still gradually sort of is still increasing. And they're trying very hard. And in a country which is like the second most populated country in the world, if I may say, it's not an easy task to control something like this from spreading. And I can tell you some of my people in my family, who are working. My dad, well, he classifies as an essential workers in these times. So he has been deployed by the government for certain areas for some like surveying duties or keeping track of what's happening, because he's a government officer. And I think it's just scary for us, because I know every day he goes out, my mom is worried that he's out there, he's at the risk of being exposed. And I think it's just a reality, we have to live with. I would say we have to build back better, but you hear this term everywhere in the US. Every single day I hear it almost 100 times, someone saying we have to build back better. But I think
And
um,
that's
yeah.
unprecedented. It's
Yeah, unprecedented crisis. We have to build back better. And yes, we have to build back better, but we have to build back better in the communities. Yes, we talk about it in the UN. And I think there is, but I mean, that being said, there have been progress made as well. You have seen governments rolling out COVID recovery packages, EU and Germany, and also stepping up to help other countries. But at the same time, in several countries, I mean, I will not name a specific one, it has also exposed medical health system vulnerabilities of the health system. We have seen how excellently New Zealand has done. So they came down, they closed really the curve, brought it down to zero with the strict conditioning that they have, and the restrictions they imposed. Whereas we are seeing countries in the world where healthcare, where you should wear a mask or you should not wear a mask, is a political issue. Whether you should socially distance yourself or not is a political issue. I mean, yes, so we, of course, we respect all rights of people to do as they prefer, and free speech and everything. At the same time, you have to respect what the science is saying, because this is not a political opinion, it's a scientific opinion. It's fact that how the virus is spreading, and that we have to take precautionary measures. And it's really not just about you. You're infecting like 10 more people if you're carrying it, and if you're in a public setting, you're infecting way more people. So I think that is something that we have to maintain. And I don't think in some parts of the world it doesn't have to be such a political issue that it has become. And I don't want to name anyone specific, but it's really insane what's happening in some parts of the world. So But at the same time, I think yesterday Guardian published a very big report, saying, was it Guardian or one of the UK paper, Independent or Guardian, published, saying how when Italy reached out to EU for requests on medical supplies, there was no response from the EU and its member states, and that was not because they didn't want to, because they didn't have those supplies. So the problem is that our medical systems, are not prepared for it. Very recently, just earlier this week, last week, UNEP released a report on how to prevent next zoonosis. And Inger Anderson, who's executive director of the UNEP, once said that this crisis or this disease is happening not because the animals are coming to us, but because we are going to their habitats and we are disrupting their habitats. We're killing them, we are disturbing where they live, and that's why those diseases that are basically, those are the vectors that animals carry, they are coming to humans. So we have to stop destruction of biodiversity, we have to stop invading, if I may say, other species, and we have to regulate it, if not completely stop it. There has to be done with safe measures on how you can do. And I don't know when this crisis will solve. I do not know if we would have an on-ground UN conference within a year from now. When is the vaccine going to be available? When is the vaccine going to be available to everyone? Because again, giving it to a few, the ones that can buy and purchase, is one aspect. How do you make it universally available for everyone? It's also going to be a challenge. But I would like to say something on an ending note, if you allow me, on youth engagement. But unless you have any other question on
No,
that.
shoot.
No, I think Maria, is almost 1.5 hours in the discussion. I think it's been interesting. I think I only have a message that look, how we treat children and youth of today is going to be a precursor for the governance, global governance, in next 10 years from now. We are already seeing examples where there is lack of globalism, or there is more insularity, where people don't want to cooperate, countries don't want to cooperate with each other. And but the world that we are living in, we have to practice multilateralism, and we have to practice collectivism. And if we do not empower this generation correctly, you are going to further perpetuate the same system that we have. If you really want systemic change, you have to start empowering, the ones in mid 20s, ones in mid 30s now. So then they become the part of the government, or they become the leadership. They're able to steer it right. And I think, whether you call them youth organizations, youth constituencies, serve as a very right platform to do so. Like, we want, future leaders emerging from these spaces, the one that understand complexities and are able to navigate, and they don't do the same sort of mistakes that our current governance, global governance system is doing. We are in middle of HLPF. There have been enough reports and conversations around if SDGs are achievable by 2030. And of course, when we reach 2030, I mean, I guess by 2025 itself, we will have negotiation processes starting on Agenda 2050, I believe, something that would take us more down into the same direction. So how is that going to be any different? Who is going to be leading those processes? And that is why empowering this generation, right, is very, very important. And it's not going to be an easy road. It's not going, especially for young women, especially for women like you and me, who are women of color, Black community women. They have all different sets of challenges, different narratives. When you step into a meeting room, the default instinct of people is to not take you seriously. They do not respect your opinion unless they have to, unless you prove them. Whereas if your counterpart, without any of his fault, of course it's not his fault, but if a male counterpart steps in that same role, you will feel that there is a higher sort of a status allocated to that person by default. And the rise of Black Lives Matter movement in the last months has again shown us how inclusive our social structures need to become. And young women from developing countries, I mean, if there are, I'm sure on your channel there are going to be many young women watching this. So my message to all of them is that, don't give up. At some point of time you will feel like giving up, and you just have to remain true to your values and remember why you started this at first place, because that is core of who you are. And at sometimes even have thick skin to what's happening around you, because you will have to understand that while we are approaching the ideal world, while we are advocating for an ideal world, the world currently is not ideal. I would be naive if I say that men and women are treated with same status. I say yes, they have to be treated, but they're currently not treated with same status. And it's a reality which we have to change, but at the same time we have to operate in the same reality. So being aware of that, and taking active measures to do that is quite important. And I think I would end by saying that when we are in these spaces, it's important that we do not let power get into our heads. uh, there is a lot of conversations around. If you look at activists movements or people's movements, they talk about people power, decentralization power. Of course, I know there are different political spectrum, where you have socialism, where you have those who fall on a moderate scale. But the point being made here is that those who are in power, they need to be held accountable, whether that is our elected leaders, whether that is someone in a facilitative position, whether that is someone leading even a community led youth organization. They have to be held accountable to what they are doing. And I think that is very, very important if we want to build eventually a system which in long term changes the curve of this planet. Otherwise, IPCC is clear. I don't have to repeat it. 2030, if we do not cut down emissions by 50%, if we do not bring down our levels of pollution in oceans, air pollution, chemicals and waste, and all of the problems that we have, we are going to be on an irreversible curve of doing it. And those that are suffering are the ones that didn't contribute to this, and are also are the ones that do not have any means to influence any of the solutions. So the ones that have means to influence solutions, including people like myself and you, have to use it in a right way and advance the collective cause as opposed to only personal cause.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect way to end the show. Thanks, Yugratna, for those amazing words. And also thank you for giving us your time. I know you're very busy. And I hope it's been a great experience for everyone else who's been watching. Thanks again. Okay,
Thank
bye.
you very much. Have a great day. Yeah.